Listen, we talked last week about this narrative that the left is propagating right now. They're telling you that Antifa is a decentralized network of grassroots groups. There's no organizational structure. The mainstream media is saying, how can you declare Antifa to be a terror group when Antifa is just an idea? It's just a set of beliefs. This is what the mainstream media and leftist activists are trying to get you to think. They're engaging in essentially not just emotional manipulation. They are trying to rewrite your mind, because you saw those videos. You saw that this is not an organic grassroots group of citizens who are discontented with Trump's policies on deportation and they're raising their voices peacefully against him. You see the reality. You can see it. You're not stupid. You have eyes. But what the left is doing is they're trying to engage in re-education camps. They're trying to rewire your mind so that when you see something, they tell you that you're seeing something else. So they're telling you Antifa is just an idea. It's the wind. It's a belief set. These individual chapters of Antifa aren't connected. They're a decentralized network. So how do you go after them when they're not really the same thing? And we established last week that that's a lie. That's not true. This is a false narrative. It's intentionally deceptive because the reality is that Antifa is a highly coordinated group. And when I say highly coordinated, they are very strategic in their deception. The way that Antifa works and the way that these Antifa chapters are actually connected to each other is they hide behind leftist groups that act as shell groups. So, for example, Antifa needs three things. They need training, they need funding, and they need legal support. So if they're a decentralized network, how exactly do each of these chapters obtain these necessities for operation? Well, training. Let's start with training. To get training in militia tactics, in revolutionary Marxist tactics, we're talking about vanguard tactics, violence, they associate themselves with groups like the Socialist Rifle Association or the John Brown Gun Club. Groups that appear to be autonomous, and yet their workshops, their so-called educational workshops and training sessions are attended by Antifa members. It's like a shell game. Money's fungible. It looks like the Socialist Rifle Association and the John Brown Gun Club are just training their own members, but actually they're serving as the shell group training Antifa. That's training. The same thing happens with funding. Where do they get the money to organize themselves, to travel? Where do they get the money for all of their militarized equipment that they are leveraging against the American people and our government facilities and law enforcement? If they're a decentralized network, how on earth do they get that kind of, you know how hard fundraising is? Where do they get this stuff? It's not members' dues, let me tell you that. Well, of course it's not. They get their funding from Roy Singham connected NGOs. They get resources from Code Pink. You know what they call it? They share resources with Code Pink. Code Pink is Roy Singham's wife's group. They get funding from, they are associated with the Party of Socialism and Liberation, which is funded by the People's Forum, which is funded to the tune of $20 million by Roy Singham. They hide. Antifa hides behind these leftist groups that serve as shell groups so that it's trickier to catch them. So that the mainstream media can get away with trying to lie to people and tell them that Antifa is a decentralized network. And what about legal support? You have to have legal support when you're engaging in crime, unless you want to spend the rest of your life in jail. Well, Antifa has this. They have legal support in the form of an organization called the National Lawyers Guild. And I want to show this on the screen because you can look at what's happening outside of these ICE facilities in Portland, Oregon right now. In the midst of these Antifa riots, these Antifa terror attacks, there are groups of people who have helmets on, brightly colored helmets on, or hats, these green hats. You see these people that are wearing green helmets? I mean, they look like bike helmets. And then some of them have like ball caps, truckers' hats on, and they're bright green. Well, what does that indicate? What's the significance of the bright green helmets? The significance of these green helmets are they identify these individuals as observers. They're so-called legal observers of the National Lawyers Guild, the NLG. Now, the purpose of these so-called legal observers is really exactly what it sounds like. They're looking for instances that they can document, that they can accuse police of brutality, and they are looking to document the actions of Antifa members in order to help with their legal defense when they are prosecuted. This is the legal support that shows up coincidentally as this grassroots. Is this just a bunch of lawyers who woke up and said, you know what, I think I'm going to put on a green hat and I'm going to go outside of an ICE facility in Portland, Oregon, and I'm going to help these militarized thugs who hate America. The idea that this is grassroots and organic is ludicrous. This is highly coordinated. The National Lawyers Guild is the legal support of Antifa. They also, by the way, they provide funding, money, financial support to bail out the Antifa terrorists when the Antifa terrorists are arrested and put in prison. Now, here's the thing. Who are these people? Where do they get their money? Well, the National Lawyers Guild is intricately tied to Mark Elias's Democracy 2025 project. Oh, aren't we surprised? Mark Elias, the so-called Democrat super lawyer who was the mastermind, the architect, the evil genius behind the electioneering of the 2020 presidential election, changing all of the rules in the name of COVID to benefit the Democrats, to cheat President Trump out of office, to instead install Joe Biden. It was Mark Elias's lawsuits and his apparatus that led to universal mail-in ballots, degraded signature verification, of course, unmanned ballot boxes, ballot harvesting, all of these different things that Mark Elias had no authority to change unilaterally, that states had to actually amend their constitution in order to change, but we just had these random election administrators change these rules instead at the behest of people like Mark Elias. So isn't that a funny coincidence that it's Mark Elias's Democracy 2025 project who is intricately tied to the National Lawyers Guild, these green hat legal observers who just organically show up outside of Antifa terror attacks to make sure that when Antifa militants are charged with crimes, they can help them get off easily. They can bail them out of prison. They can instead file countersuits against police for so-called brutality, you know, defending themselves and their facilities and the American people. This is not a decentralized network of grassroots activists organically protesting their grievances to the government. This is a highly coordinated network of terror groups. And by the way, we made the argument on this show last week that President Trump has every authority to declare Antifa to be a terror group, even though they are not technically a foreign terrorist organization because they're operating here. And the argument that we made is because they're receiving funding from Roy Singham, who acts at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party. And so they aren't actually a domestic terror group. They operate all around the world. And one of the primary sources of their funding, or at least a large source of their funding, is, yeah, he's an American citizen. He lives in Shanghai because the Chinese communists gave him permission to do so. And he uses his money to spread domestic unrest, to fund violence here in the United States, perfectly in line, again, coincidentally, with the Chinese Communist Party's plot to sow domestic unrest via violence here in the United States. So yeah, President Trump has every authority, every right to declare them a domestic terror group. At the same time, if President Trump wants to up the ante, he also has the authority to declare Antifa a foreign terrorist group because Antifa is tied to an actual foreign terrorist group, a terrorist group that is headed by Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. Remember when we talked about the John Brown Gun Club? The John Brown Gun Club, Andy Ngo, who's one of the predominant journalists who've documented the rise of Antifa in our country, he describes the John Brown Gun Club as essentially just Antifa. They're a black bloc militant, Marxist, communist, violent group who wants to use violent tactics, they don't just want to, they use violent tactics to try to impose their political beliefs on the United States. We've talked before about the John Brown Gun Club. They have associations with the Armed Queers of Salt Lake City, which is under investigation by the FBI. The FBI is investigating to see if they had foreknowledge of Charlie Kirk's assassination, since individuals in Salt Lake City associated with armed queers posted cryptically in the days and weeks leading up to Charlie Kirk's assassination, signaling that they knew something big was going to happen. The John Brown Gun Club once hosted a joint training session with the founder of Armed Queers, Maya Fanayan. Again, this is not grassroots. This is not organic. This is a highly coordinated network of leftist shell groups that hide Antifa. Well, the John Brown Gun Club is not just tied to radical left, violent Antifa groups here domestically. They're also tied to what's called the Anti-Fascist International Conference. This is something outside of the United States. And the Anti-Fascist International Conference is linked to Nicolas Maduro. Nicolas Maduro, of course, is not just the dictator of Venezuela. He's also the head of the Cartel de las Solas. The Cartel de las Solas is designated as a specially designated global terrorist group. So we have Cartel de las Solas, a global terrorist group associated with Nicolas Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela, tied to the Anti-Fascist International Conference, tied to the John Brown Gun Club, which serves as a training partner shell group to Antifa. Of course, Antifa can be designated by President Trump, and it should be, as a foreign terrorist organization, because that allows the military to dismantle them, to protect the American people. It's critically important that we push back on the leftist lies about Antifa. A decentralized network. They're just grassroots. They're the wind. They're in the shadows. They're just a bunch of young people together doing things. No, they're not. They're an intricately hidden army who wants to overthrow the United States, who is actively, currently, demonstrably, you can see it with your own eyes, it's happening right now under our noses, using violence to not just sow fear in the United States, but to destroy us from within, to damage our rule of law. Because they hate America. They're Marxists, they're communists, and they want that imposed on our country. And if you don't believe me, look at any one of their websites. They admit this in their own words. Thank goodness we have President Trump in the White House, because he understands this. And he also understands that he has the full, just authority as chief executive of the United States, as president of the United States, to dismantle them.